Hi, everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge yet again. Yet again, critical hull beach detected. Life support failing. Reactor overload imminent. The great Swad 1011 gets the comment of the year. I've got all kinds of internet problems. First of all, let me just say this: the internet in our office building is terrible. It sucks. We're paying, we're paying for industrial internet. We're in Sherman Oaks, California. We're not exactly in Zimbabwe or anything, and we've got the worst internet connection in this office ever, of all time. So we are going to have to deal with that. And I am going to go and look into live stream. I've been saying it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I just am so busy. I just kind of plop down in the chair here, and that's that. So we're going to take it from the top because we've had so many restarts. It's almost 6:30, so we'll do another half hour at the end. We'll go to 8. But anyway, Stratosphere Lounge, episode 10, the most badly produced show on the internet. I got a note there in the comment section from somebody saying it's in California. Why don't I move? I just shot an afterburner earlier today. It's one of the reasons I was rushing down here through traffic. So not only do I have to go through traffic, my brand new Camaro has a heads-up display. It projects my speed onto the bumper of the car in back of me. So it's always nice to know when I go from 3 miles an hour to 4 miles an hour on the way to work. It's really lovely. So I have to put up with slow traffic to get to my office, where I put up with a slow internet connection. I really should move. Up at Coeur d'Alene, up at Bert's house, he had some insane rate. He had like 10 megabytes up or something like that. But anyway, the afterburner today was about moving about out of California. It's called Going Out of Business, and I really like it, and I'll have it up. Hopefully they'll have it on YouTube tomorrow morning, and we'll link that on Facebook, and we'll get that thing out there. But anyway, we got a late start today after a lot of technical problems. Bless you people for sticking with us. So now we're gonna kick this thing into high gear and get to our questions. First question comes from Joshua Schweitzer, who says, kindly enough, glad to hear you're feeling better, Bill. I had to cancel the show yesterday because I wasn't on my game. Actually, for the first time in my life, I've been suffering from insomnia. My entire life, for 51, 52 years, I just go out like a gone and sleep for 10 hours. I need a lot of sleep anyway. But lately, I've gotten less and less and less sleep. And you know what? I blame George W. Bush. I blame Bush. I don't know what else to say. Actually, the fact is I blame Obama. I really do begin to think that I'm not sleeping because just every single day I wake up to something so horrible and so unbelievable and so mind-boggling that I can't process it, and then I have to deal with it in my nightmares. So anyway, thanks for all the kind words yesterday for me not being able to do the show because I was feeling pretty lousy. I'd gotten got an hour's sleep in 2 days, and yesterday I was just out of fuel. But anyway, thanks, Josh, and for everybody else. But here's this question. Unrelated, do you have any advice for an aspiring young filmmaker of 16 years old in Hollywood? Does it boil down to what you know, who you know, or perhaps a little of both? Is it what you know, who you know, or perhaps a little of both? Yes. It's all of those things. My first advice, Josh, I don't know if it's for you or for somebody else, but my first advice to anybody trying to get started in the film business is stay away from Hollywood for a while. There's no worse place to start in this business than Hollywood. Hollywood is the place you come when you already have a filmmaking record. You do not want to learn how to make movies here. It's a terrible place to make movies if you're a beginning filmmaker, if you're 16 years old. Simplest example I can give you is we started making movies. When I lost the Air Force Academy, I went to the Air Force Academy for the flight physical, and my left eye got a little soft, and most this sad tale of woe about how I was going to be a fighter pilot. And that summer, when I realized I wasn't going to do what I wanted to do and prepared myself to do since I'd been 5 for 12 years, I had some friends who had a Super 8 movie camera. We started making movies, and that's what got me into show business. And just simple things like doing Super 8 movies, we just go out on the street and we'd shoot them. You try to do that here in Los Angeles, and you're going to get police are going to pull you over, and then there's going to be permits and the union people. It's just a bloody mess. Mark Monk says, stay away from Hollywood's good advice for everybody. Yeah, it is. If the fight weren't here, if the heart of the fight weren't here, I'd be someplace lovely like Idaho or Indiana or Minnesota. All these places I get to go visit. But the ability to just go out and shoot a movie technically is much, much easier than it used to be, and I'll get to that in a minute, Josh. But everything in California is set up to not make movies. This is a town set up for $400 million movies. And if you don't have $400 million and you're 16, then you probably shouldn't come here yet. with that said, the fact is, once you have established yourself, not only do you need to come to Hollywood, you have to come to Hollywood. There's nowhere else to go. So it's a weird sort of thing. So in a nutshell, I would say, Josh, if you're a young filmmaker, you need to stay out in the boonies. I was in the Miami Coral Gables boonies. You need to stay out in the boonies, start making some films, and when you learn how to make movies, because you always have to make a bunch before you learn how to do it. It's like any other trade. Make as many as you can. You learn from your mistakes. And then when you have something that's actually decent and people start paying attention to it, and you get compliments from people who aren't your relatives, then you can start thinking about maybe taking it seriously. And then you can actually think about sending it in and have a reason to come out. There's a lot about that filmmaking thing I want to talk about briefly. But first, let me tell you about the procedure, because the real breakthrough's in the technology. Let me start with the procedures. Like any other trade, as I said, if you want to be an auto repairman, or if you want to be a doctor, or if you want to be anything else, whatever you want to do, you have to start someplace where you can make your mistakes. Most doctors make their initial mistakes operating on, dead frogs. And then you progress up the food chain. You need to learn how to make movies. And I'm speaking as a person who's written, directed, edited movies. I've acted in movies. I've done pretty much all of it. I've lit them. I've been the sound guy. I've been everything on these things. If you are one of those filmmaking auteurs, if you're one of those people that wants to write and direct, I will tell you this. You will learn how to make a movie in the edit bay. Because when you get to the edit bay, and that edit bay may be your laptop, when you get to the edit bay, you'll realize these two shots don't cut together. The reason they don't cut together is because you cross the line, or they don't cut together because you have a mid shot and a medium mid close shot, and the difference between the two is not enough. So your eye gets this jarring sense of, like, instead of a wide shot cut to a close up, which is a clean cut, it's a wide shot cut to kind of a mid wide, and it's not enough of a cut, and it looks bad. And you'll learn how to assemble scenes, and then you'll realize, you know what, I've got to make some time pass, or the guy's got his hand up in the wide shot, and in the alternate wide or the reverse shot or whatever, his arm is at his side, and if only I had a picture of a portrait of the guy's daughter on his desk, I could cut away to the portrait, then I'd come back, and then I could use take two, and you learn all these things. But you won't know how to do it until you do it, and you won't know what mistakes you're capable of until you make them. You cannot, like anything else, you cannot learn this and then go out and do it. You have to go out and do it and learn it from your mistakes, and you will make a bunch of them. With all of that said, there's never been a more amazing time to make movies for a number of reasons. You would think that the big breakthroughs in technology in terms of producing movies are the breakthrough, but that's not really it. I'll get to the major breakthrough in a second. Back in my day when I was a boy, we used to scratch out movies on a piece of slate with a sharp rock. We'd draw a stick figure of an individual with his arm raised, and then we would pick up another slate and scratch out another one with his arm more slightly raised. And by flipping the slates at high speed, we could give our fellow cave dwellers a sense of motion. The equipment I got started on was Super 8 film. And Super 8 film was cut with a block and just slice it with a little, like a guillotine, and you put a piece of tape on it, and then you make a cut. Then we immediately graduated very quickly to Super 8 sound, which was fantastic. But the problem with Super 8 sound was film frames have to go through the gate. They have to stop. So the film gets advanced to the gate. It stops. Little pins come in and lock it in place. The shutter rotates. It exposes that frame, and then the shutter closes, and then the little claws grab the next frame and pull that down. So motion pictures, movie film is a series of snap, 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 snap. It's still move, still move, still move. But unfortunately, you would record the sound on a little audio stripe on the side of that Super 8 movie thing, and the sound can't stop. The sound has to be in constant motion over the head. So what they did was they made sure that the picture was about 1.5 inches from the sound head. So the picture's doing its thing, but the sound head had a steady linear flow, so you could get reasonable sound. Now the problem with that was, if you cut for the picture, the sound was a second out, and if you cut for the sound, the picture was a second out, and it was pretty damn horrible. I'm telling you this sad tale of woe, Josh, or all of anybody out there who might be interested in a filmmaking career, so you can understand just how hard your ancestors worked out there building our flinty little cabins out there on the frontier. You kids today, what with your widescreen TVs and your jet cars and your underwater submarines, we used to just pray on our knees for undue buttons, and we were damn glad when we had them. So we progressed from Super 8 film to 16 millimeter film. Now, 16 millimeter film, separate strip of film for the film, and you would cut it with a scissors or with a block, and you would tape it together. And then the sound was called full coat. It looked exactly like 16 millimeter film, but it was magnetic film. Imagine a piece of film that looks like magnetic stripe, had sprockets in it and everything. So then you would record the sound completely separately on a recorder called a Nagra, and they would have a sync cable running to the projector, to the camera, so they stayed in sync, or a Nagra might have a crystal motor that ran really accurately so they wouldn't drift too much over time. By the way, for those of you out there who have any interest in filmmaking, not many people really understand what the slate is for, and action. For those of you who don't know what that's for, back in the olden days, when I started, as I said, film was recorded in a camera and audio was recorded on a tape recorder. And what the slate did was, the slate gave the picture, which has no sound on it. It gave it a written description of the scene. The audio, which has no picture on it, has an audio description of the scene. Scene 23, take 2, mark, slap. And the clapboard gave you a very, very crisp, defined sound that was just a click. And also, the reason they put the stripes on it, it gave the camera, because you're doing this, you're doing frames, right? So the camera's like snick, 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 snick. And where they touched, right, that's where you mark your sync point on the picture. And then on the audio track, you scrub that back and forth, click, and get the click. And then you put little X's with a little grease pencil, and now you've got a sync point. You have to do all of this to make one cut. One cut. So then you'd have these things marked. Now, there used to be a giant set of cranks and wheels that we would crank, and there was a little display thing that looked like one of those, what were those stereo things called? Viewmaster things. Those guys. And so you're looking at the picture, scrolling this thing back and forth. There's a little sound here. It was a nightmare. It was a freaking nightmare. Now, right around the time I got to college, we had this super advanced step forward called a flatbed editor. And what a flatbed editor was, this gigantic table with a little monitor, not real big, about the size of the monitors on Star Trek, the original series. Those little bitty little screens they have in the briefing room. And what this would do is, it had mechanized flat plates. That's why they call it a flatbed. So instead of the film reels being vertical, they would lie flat. And simple ones would have 3 different tracks. So up front, I'd have on one side, I'd have my source movie, and I'd bring that through to a little viewing head, and I'd put it on the pickup reel, and then sound number 1 and sound number 2. And then what I would do is, using a mechanical controller, this thing was powered by electricity. Boys and girls, it was powered by electricity, and the thing lit up, and you turn a little knob, and you hit a button, ka-chunk, and you'd feel that solenoid kick in, and you'd start scrolling picture. And on the little screen, you'd see your movie doing its little thing, magic. And then you'd unlock the picture, and you'd hit the sound button, and you'd turn that knob again, and you'd hear the sound. And then you would take the picture, back to picture, and you get to the clapper mark, right? And you take a little grease pencil and mark that, and then you'd isolate that, and you'd bring the sound thing in, get the sound thing in, you'd mark that, lock them together, and now by turning this dial, you can have picture and sound going back and forth. You're ready to make your very first edit. You want to cut here, you would then guillotine cut both of these things. Here's your record side. You'd have to take both of these things off, put them up, hang them up, and then you'd have to go to your bin. That's why they call these things bins, kids, bins. And you'd pull down a new piece of film, and you'd mechanically put it in there, and you'd mechanically splice it, and you'd tape the 2 things together, and you'd run them back, and you'd sync them up. And after all of that has happened, you have one cut. One. And if you didn't like the cut, then what you had to do was you had to undo the tape, and you had to go back and find that piece of film. Sometimes that piece of film is 3 frames long, and sometimes a piece of full coat audio tape that's about 3 frames long, and you can't see what it is. So you have to splice that onto leaders and run it. I spent the whole first 15 minutes of the show complaining about the internet and how awful things are, and I'm really glad I got into this, because frankly, it's really just making me down on my knees to appreciate how far we've come. So anyway, Josh, and those of you young filmmakers out there, that's what your grandparents used to have to do. Guys like me, that's how we got started. Then along comes video that starts to be able to be played at a level that starts to look good, or you could make film and video, film and sound, sync them together, transfer them to video. Digitize them is what you do. And once you got it digitized, then you can edit on a computer. Now, just to wrap up the final edition of True Tales of Filmmaking, whoa, I got my dad's friend. I keep mentioning this guy who's been my patron my whole life. And I went back to Gainesville. I was in school in Gainesville from 79 to 82. And I went back in 93 to do a sketch comedy show because I wanted to. I'd always wanted to do a sketch comedy show. And in order to, we tried to edit it up at the studio. Video editing, very similar. At least with video editing, you don't have to put the sound and picture together. They're both recorded together. In video editing, linear editing, you would have a source thing of your rough takes. And you'd cue it up to the point you want to come in and you'd mark in. And then you'd have your record deck and you'd lay down a scene. And then you'd cue up to the next one and mark an in point on the old videotape. And they'd pre-roll and you'd lay them in one after the other. But if you made a mistake or if you didn't like something, it's done. You can't go back to 5 shots ago and open it up or tighten it up. You have to re-edit everything after from that point. And that machine, we used a click track. It didn't even have time code. Long story. It was worthless. So I went down there and made a business pitch to my friend's dad, and he bought us based on the returns on the show that we were going to sell, which didn't materialize. And not for the first time with this guy. I don't know where. I wouldn't be here without Jerry Stipp. Wouldn't be here. But we got a non-linear editing system, very much like Final Cut Pro. And when I say very much like Final Cut Pro, just so you know, I bought 2 drives. I needed 2 video drives for this, and the resolution was 320 by 240, I think. And I bought 2 drives, and they were Maxtor Panther drives. They were about this big. They were about the size of a loaf of bread, and they weighed a ton each. They took up the entire inside of the case. They were 1 gigabyte drives each. Each one had 1 gigabyte, and I felt like the king of Siam. But once you get footage digitized, once you have footage in the computer, then every single frame has its own sound attached. So you don't have to go through that sync nonsense again. And then once it's in the computer, every single frame has a digital identifier. And then nonlinear editing, which is what we've been doing on all of my firewalls, everything, all this other stuff. Once you get each individual frame and its accompanying soundtrack has a digital number, then editing is simply telling the computer to play frame 623 to 914, to jump ahead to frame 13,422 and play that through 15,906, then come back to frame 622. And once you do that, it's just easy. So for the cost of an Apple laptop, a used laptop, $300-400 now, you can edit on Final Cut Pro, and you can do things in Final Cut Pro in the space of 5 minutes. I was speaking as an editor now who works on Final Cut Pro and worked on the Avid. I can do in 5 minutes what it would take me better part of 2 weeks to do before. And I'm not exaggerating. In fact, all of nonlinear editing would be worth it if it were just for the undo button, just that. So it's a fantastic set of breakthroughs. And I'm telling you all this only so you know that today for about $1,000, you can go out there and shoot HD video, 1080 HD video, which is airable and projectable. And you can edit it on Final Cut Pro, and you can produce movies that are actually, for all intents and purposes, nearly as good, almost a 2K image, nearly as good as what the big boys are shooting with. Now back in my day, the difference between Super 8 filmmaker in terms of the final look and a feature filmmaker was millions of dollars. Now we're talking about a difference of hundreds, if not $1,000. You can get professional quality work for a couple $1,000s. That's amazing. It's utterly amazing. One more little hint for you prospective filmmakers out there. The latest breakthrough is that these video cameras are now so fast. That means that they're so sensitive to light that you don't have to light scenes anymore. You can use natural light. I'm using more or less natural light in here. I've got a couple little lights that are aiming at me, but I'm not lighting this shot. These cameras are so fast that you don't have to bring in 10,000 watts of lighting. And somebody has a Red camera. Flint, your Red camera is unnecessary. My God, man, we have to talk. Now, the Red, for example, Red's a fantastic camera. It's a digital camera, very quick, which means you can go into a candlelit room and you don't have to fake candlelight by having thousands of watts of lights with orange gels. It's somebody's flickering little pieces of cut, little shreds of red gel in front of it to simulate. No, it just shoots candlelight. If you don't have to light, you can move much faster. Lighting takes forever. And since you don't have to light as much, just kind of sweeten things up a little bit. And since there's so much you can do in post now, we want to make it blue, we want to make it darker, don't bring the skin tones out, we want to darken the background, coloring the film. It's fantastic. It's unbelievable. I got a couple comments here. It's a definition of capitalism and wealth. Precisely correct. Yes, all of this stuff was created because of need, and it makes everybody's life better. There is absolutely nothing about the work that I did as a filmmaker in my teens and 20s that is better than what I do now. It was miserable, awful drudgery, and it took all of the creativity out of it because you're just consumed by doing the nonsense. It's like having an electronic calculator if you're trying to work a theory. You imagine guys like Newton having to do the math in their heads on a piece of paper? You imagine what these guys could have accomplished with something as simple as a calculator? So it's tremendous. Now, that whole song and dance, that whole dog and pony show to tell you how high a quality a person of talent can achieve on a very low budget. It's really, really important. You can achieve virtually feature film quality. You can certainly achieve the kind of quality to air it and the kind of quality that will get you feature films. So that's the good news. The good news is your toolkit is enormous compared to my toolkit, what it was, and it's much better tools. They're professional grade tools and they're affordable. But the big fundamental difference between when I was a filmmaker and 16-year-old filmmakers today is distribution. And when I say distribution, I mean YouTube. If I had finished a film, we finished a bunch of films. We probably did, 7 or 8, 10 mini feature Super 8 films. They were 30 minutes long, and I did a bunch of shorts and 16 millimeter shorts and things like that. And I might have them seen by, the Super 8 films were probably never seen by more than 100 people. And my college films on 16 millimeter might have been seen by a few thousand people. But on YouTube, if you've got something good, you can have millions of people watch your work. And in high def quality, it's amazing. And now with streaming video and Apple TV and people are giving up TV channels, people are giving up going to the movies except for the big tentpole pictures. You have the ability now, as a young filmmaker, if you can scrape together $2,000-$3,000, you can produce professional quality results that will be shown on people's widescreen TVs in their homes. It becomes indistinguishable from Paramount and Sony, which is why all of these big studios are eventually doomed, or at the very least are going to end up doing nothing but $300 million tentpoles like Batman and Spider-Man and Avengers. The opportunities available today are unbelievable. So for God's sakes, folks, don't come to Hollywood. You're insane. Go someplace where you can get people to cooperate because it's fun, where they don't make a movie every day. Hey, buddy, sir, pardon me, can we use your restaurant? What for? We're shooting a movie. A movie? Why, yes. Oh, of course you can. Allow me to put on my tuxedo that I normally wear when I seat people and get them in the movie. And you can't talk about movies also without talking about financing. You will not get people to finance a movie for you in Hollywood if you're a new filmmaker, but you might be able to get your Uncle Dave to do it if you do it in, Des Moines. And if that sounded like it was a slur at Des Moines, it's not. I love the middle of this country, and this is another reason why I like it. You can probably find a car salesman who can give you some money if you throw a Chevy in the car. It'll be fun, and the people will have fun doing it, and you can have a premiere in your local town theater. You can rent a screen at a Cineplex for a couple $100 probably, and you can have a premiere and you can have fun. You can show the movie. You may be able to sell the movie, who knows. But do all of this away from Hollywood, and then when you've made something, if you made your first, nobody makes a first film out of the gate. Orson Welles made Citizen Kane only because Orson Welles understood theater lighting and performance. He'd been doing this for practically decades. Well, not decades, he was 24 or something. But Orson Welles, as the prime example of a guy who ever made a great movie right out of the gate probably, is had done a lot of work in theater, so he was prepared. He learned his lessons. Make your mistakes out there where it's cheap. I was making a movie in Florida. I was making a low-budget feature film for about $800,000, and it never finished, by the way, because the investors pulled out halfway through. When I think about what I could do today with $800,000, it's amazing. But we were making movies, and we were making mistakes. We had a producer who had a big cocaine habit, which I found out on day 9. And the director of photography, who had a lot of experience, had a wife who was working on a major film they were shooting in Florida, in Miami. And that film was probably a $45 million Hollywood film. And I went up to him at the end of the day. I said, Ken, this is just killing me. This is just killing me. These mistakes are killing me. And he said, well, Bill, your mistakes have 3 zeros after them, and the mistakes on my wife's movie have 5 zeros after them. Yeah, good point. So that's my advice. Stay where you are. Make movies don't use your friends if you can help it, unless they are talented actors. You will find good actors in any town in America. Look for dinner theater, look for local theater. Get people who want to do this for a living. If you want to use your friends, of course, use your friends. There's going to come a point, though, rapidly in your career, where you're going to outgrow the talent of your friends just because they're your friends. If they're friends who are in the trade, if they're friends who want to be professional filmmakers, then their skills will increase along with yours. And if you're a writer-director and you have a friend who wants to be an actor, he's going to become a better actor as you become a better writer-director. But if you're not blessed by having friends who are good in show business and talented in filmmaking or acting or lighting or writing or any of that stuff, comes a point when you have to leave your friends behind and get people who want to be good at this. Go out and get the money and do it, Josh. That's what I recommend. I cannot say it highly enough. Don't come here, go do it. And if you finish a film, let me know. If it looks like it's a good finished film, I'll promote it on Facebook. Be my pleasure. So that's that. That's a good start after a bad and rocky beginning technically, and here I am complaining about the internet and computers when they saved. I'd be 150 years old by now. And by the way, the digital effects on something simple like Firewall, I mean, simple things that I do in the space of 4 or 5 hours of post-production would take me weeks and tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. But you know, I bought the top of the line Macintosh for about $5-6 grand, and it's been working for a year and a half, and I love it. I mean, I bought the fastest one there is because I have a lot of rendering to do. Anyway, that's my filmmaking advice. I hope it works out for you, Josh. And like I said, if anybody on our team who's a Facebook fan has a film they want to promote, I'll be happy to link it. Moving on. Jeremy, pass the barbecue bologna, please, Smith. How do you not like a guy like that? I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on all those people who are anti-Romney and don't even know why. I've seen so many folks turn up their nose at his name, but they can't tell me why. It's like he's caught a case of the pale and nobody likes her and nobody can tell me why. Also, do you have any pointers on what I could do to make them start to favor Romney? I'd be happy to talk about that. I was pretty hard on Mitt Romney during the entire primary process, and the things I was hard on him about, I don't feel like I've backed up or changed my mind on. Maybe one or two things. The primary criticism of Mitt Romney is he's probably the least conservative Republican that we've ever nominated. He is the governor of a big liberal state. He governed fairly liberally, but of course the giant Achilles heel, the reason so many conservatives have a problem with Mitt Romney is because he invented Obamacare. He came up with the idea of an individual mandate for basically universal health care back in Massachusetts. And since the entire conservatives' point of view of the world is that Obamacare is the ultimate evil not because it's just another government program, it's because it's the government program that puts your life in the hands of the federal government, turns your ability to live or die into a trip to the DMV. And people don't like that, and I don't like that either. And it's very hard for conservatives to get behind the guy who came up with that. I've heard criticism of Romney that says that there's only 2 politicians in American history that ever got us socialized health care, and they're both running for president this year. That's a legitimate concern. Other things about Romney are legitimately concerning. A lot of people feel, and I'm one of them, that he doesn't really have any core conservative beliefs. He has a hard time articulating it because he probably doesn't really have the philosophical grounding in it that somebody like Ronald Reagan did, and certainly not anybody like Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh, you can never pin down Rush Limbaugh. You can never get Rush Limbaugh uncomfortable or sweaty or even really genuinely irate, at least not in terms of questions, because Rush Limbaugh knows what he believes. He has a consistent belief system that has been time-tested and it works. And so whenever he has a question that seems to stump him, he goes back to his belief system, and there's his answer. I like to think I have the same sort of thing. I'm not in Rush's league, but I think about these things a lot, and I test them, and where I find that I've got a weakness, I'll change my mind. So that's the case against Romney. The case for Romney has pretty much been, well, he's not Barack Obama, and frankly, Jeremy and all the rest of you out there, that's a plenty damn good reason to vote for Mitt Romney. As a matter of fact, that's a good reason to put out lawn signs. It's a good reason to make campaign donations. It is the essential reason to vote for Mitt Romney is because he's not Barack Obama. Now, that's not the kind of talk that generates a lot of enthusiasm, but it is the essence of it. When I said I'd vote for a sponge or a mop over this guy, I wasn't kidding. I'd vote. Listen, at this point, after seeing the things I've seen from Barack Obama, Prior to Barack Obama, I thought Hillary Clinton was the Antichrist. I thought she was the most liberal busybody in the world, and she is. But if it were Hillary Clinton running against Barack Obama, I would campaign for Hillary Clinton. I'd be out on the stump for Hillary Clinton at this point. We have to stop this guy. So that's reason number one. We have to stop him. So that's the first reason. Now, when you start getting a little deeper into it, I think you can probably say there are many things about Mitt Romney that are appealing to people. People say he looks like the president. He does. That's not a trivial thing in this day and age. In an age of telegenic candidates, it doesn't hurt. When you saw John McCain standing there next to Barack Obama in 2008, the question was, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to the future, or do you want to go back to the cave? It's not fair, but it's life. And many people make decisions based on this. So it's an advantage. Whether it should be an advantage or not, it is an advantage. I think a bigger advantage in Mitt Romney's case is Mitt Romney strikes me as having an extremely even temperament. Temperament is important. You know, the 3 a.m. call thing that Hillary did against Obama, which was really going to his experience. But it doesn't just come down to experience, it comes down to temperament. We're finding out now, not a surprise to me, there's a book coming out, and I believe this, and I don't have any trouble believing this, that Barack Obama had to be turned down killing bin Laden 3 times. Valerie Jarrett told him not to do it, and he did it 3 times, and finally on the 4th, there's word that there was a palace coup that they basically said, if you don't, we're going to go public, and we're going to do it. And then, anyway, whether that's true or not, when you elect a president of the United States, people think, oh, experience and all this stuff, that's all important. It certainly matters. But what you're really electing, honestly, is character. You're buying character because nobody knows what the next crisis is going to be. Nobody knows what's going to happen at that 3 a.m. call. No one can predict it, and your experience may help you, but your experience will not prepare you for the things that are coming. What it's going to come down to is it's going to come down to character. And Romney strikes me as a guy who doesn't get flustered easily. That's a good quality to have. Barack Obama doesn't strike me that way at all. Barack Obama strikes me as an extremely thin-skinned, very isolated, intellectually narcissistic kind of a dude. So I think Romney's character is something for him to genuinely be proud of. I think he should run on that a little more. Najee or Nage13 over there said Romney will buy us time. Listen, the situation is so dire that we really are facing a situation with Romney. People say he's not really conservative. He's going to continue to spend. It's still going to be big government. Let's say that that's true. If we are heading towards a cliff, and all of us know that we are, then our choice comes down to an election where one guy has us doing 100 miles an hour and wants to accelerate to 150, and the other guy wants to slow the car to 40 but not change direction. They're both taking us off a cliff, but which one would we rather have? The guy who's going to at least slow the car down buys us time to do things in the House and the Senate, buys us time to do something very important with Romney, and that is Romney is a Republican. You may say he's not a conservative. Fair enough, but he is a Republican. And Barack Obama owes us nothing. We are the enemies of Barack Obama. Barack Obama gets elected over our dead bodies as conservatives, but Mitt Romney has to have our support in order to become elected. He has to have our support to get reelected. We have power. Conservatives and Republicans have power over a Republican president. Romney said many times that he would repeal Obamacare the day it comes to his desk. I believe he would. If he doesn't want to admit it was his mistake, maybe it was different in Massachusetts, I don't care. He said he would repeal it. I think we hold him to his promise. Mitt Romney also has 2 or 3 other things that I think are important. First of all, he's got a lot of a business experience. He understands how business works. The entire economy of the world, at least, is driven by America's economy. America's economy is a private sector capitalist economy. Romney is used to going into failing businesses, saying this doesn't work, this is going to change, we'll keep this. If there's one thing we need in the federal government right now and with our spending, it's somebody who says this is essential, this is not, and this is a joke. It's gone. So he has that quality. He has the qualities of management, which are important. He's not a charismatic guy. I don't want a charismatic president. I don't want a charismatic president. I don't want the Republican Barack Obama. I want a manager who will limit the power of the government and simply make sure that the government functions efficiently and relatively frugally, and the rest of us can go on with our business. So he's got a business background. Romney, I mentioned his character. I heard a story. I don't know if it's true. Maybe somebody can tell me in the comments section if they've heard any verification of this. But somebody I know said that Mitt Romney had a sizable inheritance and that he gave it away, or gave most of it away, because he wanted to go out and make it on his own. If that's true, that's a remarkable show of character. A guy who basically starts with a silver spoon in his mouth, which he's been accused of, and then basically throws it away and says, no, I make my own spoon. And Romney understands wealth creation, and Romney's not afraid to be prosperous, and we shouldn't be either. So there's a lot to say for Romney. But the argument is he buys us time. We can have influence over Mitt Romney. We need a Republican president to sign the repeal of Obamacare. And he will do that. I'm utterly convinced he does. So here's the bet I'll take with Romney. I would make this bet. Jeremy Boring pitched this to me. He basically said, and this is what got me on board with Romney, I'm going to give Mitt Romney my vote, and I will give Mitt Romney my enthusiastic vote to stop Barack Obama. If Mitt Romney runs as Barack Obama, if he continues to spend this kind of money, if it's basically all the same, then we as conservatives will split the GOP. We'll just leave. We'll go start a conservative party, and we'll do our 40 years in the wilderness or whatever it takes. If he functions indistinguishable from a liberal, which is what people say, then he doesn't get reelected. Why don't we all just make that deal together? Why don't we conservatives shake hands on that? Say that's what we're going to do. It's the only answer I have for you guys, but honestly, Jeremy, a soap dish, anybody. But Mitt Romney doesn't strike me as a bad man. Mitt Romney strikes me as a good man. He doesn't have a lot of core conservative principles, but he's a better man than Barack Obama. He's less damaging than Barack Obama. We have the ability to influence Mitt Romney in that we don't have a way with Barack Obama. And if somebody's going to sign a document repealing Obamacare, it's going to be Mitt Romney. Because if Mitt Romney doesn't do it, it's because we lose the election. If we lose the election and Obamacare gets established for 4 years, we're in serious, serious, serious trouble. Because there won't be any doctors anymore. Moving on. Michael Luchis wants me to talk about Chick-fil-A. I did a trifecta on Chick-fil-A. I won't spend a lot of time on Chick-fil-A. Full disclosure, when I went to the University of Florida the first time in 1979, I went to Oaks Mall, and I went to this fast food place, and I had a chicken sandwich, a waffle fries, and a lemonade, and I about fainted. I thought it was the best damn meal I have ever had in my entire life. It's still my favorite lunch. The nearest Chick-fil-A is a long, long way from me. It's a 20-minute, 30-minute drive in traffic from PJTV. It's an hour from here. Well, there's a new one a little closer. It's not convenient for me, but I love it. I used to eat it 3 or 4 times a week when I was in Gainesville. They're all over the South. So full disclosure, I started out liking Chick-fil-A, and frankly, if they'd flop sides and Chick-fil-A was on the wrong sides, I'd probably still eat a Chick-fil-A because I love it so much. What we saw with the boycott, what we saw when everybody went buying Chick-fil-A, I think was a pushback against not only this sort of radical gay agenda, because let's face it, the president of Chick-fil-A has a right to say things like, I don't like homosexuals, and I don't want him working in my company. He's got a right to say that. Now, then you have a legitimate right to protest this. You could probably have it. Look, he would face a discrimination suit and lose. So my view of private government, I tend to be a little more libertarian about this. My view of government is that if somebody wants to open a restaurant that doesn't cater to blacks, if it's a private business, that's their business, and then people simply just don't go there. I don't think the government has a right to tell private people how to run their business. But he didn't say that. He didn't say anything like that. He didn't say even he was anti-gay marriage. He just said he's in favor of traditional values. He said basically that I held the exact same value set that Barack Obama held 3 months ago. So now we're going to run them out of town. And Rahm Emanuel and the mayor of Boston say they're not welcome here. And meanwhile, they're allowing in a mosque that one of these mosques, I think it was Boston, where they said, well, we don't want Chick-fil-A because they're hateful, has opened a new mosque where one of the sponsors is a leading Islamic cleric who's been instrumental in trying to decide that whether or not homosexuals should be stoned to death or simply hung. We have no problem with those people. They represent Chicago values and Boston values, but we can't have a guy who says he believes in traditional marriage, can we? This, to me, is what's interesting about Chick-fil-A. So let's stop talking about Chick-fil-A and talk about why it is that progressives like Rahm Emanuel and the mayor of Boston are comfortable, and not just the progressives. Don't forget the people who are doing the protesting. Let's not forget the people who are protesting Chick-fil-A. Why is it that all these people are ready to launch a jihad, if you'll pardon the expression, against a guy who says, I'm in favor of traditional marriage and we're not going to buy your chicken sandwiches anymore, we're going to protest you and not let you into our town? Why are they okay with that and not okay with people who openly say we want to murder homosexuals and who do it every single day? Why? Why are we okay with that in this country? Because the left has made an alliance. The left so hates capitalism and prosperity that they think, this is the deep thinking that we get from the left, and we all know how this is going to turn out. The left thinks that they can use these guys to get, it's kind of like street muscle. We'll control them, don't worry. We'll be able to rein them in. When they find out how we liberals really are just totally cool with them. You know that Osama bin Laden thing? We probably could have avoided all that whole messiness with 9/11, according to the liberals. If only he'd just come over up to our house up in the hills, and we could have, hung out in the hot tub together, maybe had a nice Chardonnay. I saw a cartoon about that, made me laugh, actually. If we could just sit in a hot tub with him and sip some wine, we'd work all our problems out. They actually believe this. So since they're the enemies of America, they get in bed with them. They believe all of this business about dividing the country up into disadvantaged tribes and identity groups, and Muslims is another one that's useful for them to gather votes, so they don't have a problem with these people that open mosques that openly call for the death of homosexuals. But they do have a problem with people who say they're in favor of traditional marriage, because those are the people they have to defeat in the polls in order for them to grab the power that they have to grab. Power grab is everything for these leftists, and when you have a life that, when you've got no religion and you've got no job and you've got no friends and you've got nothing that hasn't got anything to do with your religion on earth. That's what liberalism is. It's religion on earth. And so whoever is closest to being a problem, these are the people who are attacked. Right now we'll attack conservatives because they're people that, who are getting in their way. And I don't know how else to describe it, which is an interesting segue into the next two questions, which I'm going to kind of lump together. Aaron Walker says, what is it about the liberal thinking process that makes liberals wrong on absolutely everything? And how can conservatives correct the actual process that leads them to being wrong about everything, and hence making them start being right on everything? That's an awesome question. And Ray Kaysen has a similar kind of thing. It says, I've heard and experienced myself that liberals are much more likely to unfriend their online conservative compatriots than be unfriended themselves. What do you think of the attitude that will express opinion but not tolerate? What do you think about the attitude that will express opinion but not tolerate dissenting opinion? This strikes me as a hallmark of the difference between liberals and conservatives. Exactly right, Ray. Exactly right, Aaron. This kind of ties into Chick-fil-A, so let's develop this a little further because this is an important thing. First of all, one of the reasons why liberals are much more intolerant and much more likely to unfriend somebody is because they stick their fingers in their ears when they hear an opposing viewpoint. But we hear an opposing viewpoint every minute of every day. Conservatives in America, because the media and entertainment, show business, college, stand-up comedy, professors, schools, we hear the liberal message every single day. They don't hear us at all, which is why it's so funny when they often try to describe us. There was a report on Chick-fil-A. Some reporter said, I went down to the Chick-fil-A today, and I could not believe the homophobic, hate-filled I couldn't recognize the country. A bunch of people said, we didn't hear anything like that at the actual Chick-fil-A. Which Chick-fil-A did you go to and when were you there? And the guy walked the story back. I don't think he went at all. I think he imagined that people went to go to Chick-fil-A to say, oh, those goddamn, those queers, and all of this. No. People went to Chick-fil-A because they still understand that freedom of speech and freedom to believe what you want to believe is still important in this country. That's why people went to Chick-fil-A on the boycott day. I guess it was yesterday. They don't even know anything about us, and they don't want to hear anything about us, because ultimately, modern liberalism is not even a belief system. They talk about conservative extremists, ideologues. Of course I'm an ideologue. I am an ideologue because I have an ideology. My ideology is American conservatism with a good strong sprinkling of libertarianism. Classical liberalism is what I am. I have an ideology. I think about things. And I have a belief system, and that's what you call my belief system. These people don't have a belief system. They have a system of justifying behaviors based on an emotional response to something that they feel usually guilty about. This is a very complicated topic. Let me isolate a little, like a subclass of liberals, because it's a little easier for me to deal with simply because I know them a little better. Let's talk about the Hollywood limousine liberals, the multi-millionaires who talk about having their taxes raised on them, and this kind of ties back into the filmmaking thing, I guess. When somebody like Brad Pitt, or I think Will Ferrell said it today, Will Ferrell said, I think the top tax rate should be 75%. People say, you're welcome to pay 75% if you want to, Will. You have to understand how Hollywood works and how all of this stuff works. Warren Buffett, the Warren Buffett rule, right? Buffett's a perfect example of this. When somebody says, I want to have my taxes raised, my income taxes raised, that's somebody who doesn't make a lot of money on income. Warren Buffett doesn't. I think Warren Buffett got an income of $100,000 a year, right? He's worth billions of dollars. All of his money's in capital holdings and so on. He doesn't get an income. He has his corporation pay him a token $100,000, and he pays income tax on that, which is why his secretary's salary presumably is higher than his, right, or tax rate. Likewise, when George Clooney or Matt Damon or Will Ferrell gets a $15 million payday for a movie, they don't write the check to Will Ferrell. They write the check to WF Productions. And WF Productions owns the office space and owns the cars and pays for the health care and probably leases the house and rents all the studios, and every single jet ride and everything that makes Will Ferrell's life comfortable is paid for by his production company. Then the production company pays Will Ferrell some token income, which he pays income tax on, maybe not even in the top bracket because the company pays for everything. I do the exact same thing, by the way. I have an LLC where all of my income goes, and the LLC buys everything that is a legitimate tax deduction, including the computers that I'm talking to you on now. And that's just smart. And it's not only smart, that's how business works. It's not really my income if I have to apply it into making more income, right? I don't get to keep the money I spend on this computer and spend it for business purposes. So when they talk about raising income taxes, it's all a joke. That's why they don't just give more money. It's no skin off of their nose. It's like everything else. It's the same reason why liberals want to ban jet skis, because they don't jet ski. Or they want to ban ATVs because it's out ruining the desert. They've never been in the desert in their lives. They don't want, they don't want you to have McDonald's because they don't go to McDonald's. They don't want you they want to close airports because the noise is bothering me. Well, you moved next to an airport, ma'am. You moved in next to an airport. Yes, but we should shut the airport down because of all of the noise. Well, you're not a pilot, are you? No. So they're always trying to control things that they don't have anything to do. That's why they want to ban guns. They don't own guns. Of course they want to ban guns. No skin off of their nose for them to ban guns. They're busybodies. The fundamental difference between conservatives and busybodies is conservatives mind their own business. They have their own lives. There's some defective gene that probably comes out of some deformed proto-human ancestor that somehow took a cosmic ray in the brainstem somehow, and all of their descendants have this defective gene where they're not happy unless they're making other people do what they want them to do. They're miserable. They're miserable unless they can get other people to be miserable. And they want to control every aspect of your life. So they try to tell you what to do. They just mind your own business, damn it. That's the essence of libertarianism, right? It's really kind of the essence of conservatism. Mind your own business. You have to have a business to mind. If you don't have your own business to mind, you start minding somebody else's business. Here in Los Angeles and among the upper level of the liberal intelligentsia, and this is true for your garden variety street liberals in the Occupy Wall Street movement too, ultimately, guys, what it really comes down to with these guys is they have a very romantic view of themselves. They have a romantic view of themselves based on the fact that they don't seem to be very good at anything. If they were good at something, if they genuinely excelled at something, they'd take pride in their work. And if they took real pride in their work, they would have achieved a level of skill at whatever it is they're doing, whether it's clay pottery or brain surgery. If they were good at what they did, they would achieve a level of skill where people would want their product. Then they'd start selling their product. Then they become conservatives. So when you run into your garden variety liberal who's got his fist in the air and talking about, redistributing the wealth, or they've got a Save the Earth bumper sticker on the back of their Prius, what they're really doing is they're trying to find a way to make them special, to make themselves special. They don't do it through individual achievement the way we do. This is why I don't know how I can say this more plainly. I wish I had a chance to say this every day. I mean this from as far deep in the bottom of my heart as I have a bottom to my heart. I have infinitely more respect and admiration for a person who comes to this country who has no degree, no college degree, no high school degree, and who is a janitor and who does a good job every day. Infinitely more respect for that person, infinitely more admiration for that person. Those persons deserve to be called sir and ma'am, people who work hard for a living and do a good job. Infinitely more respect for a completely illiterate janitor than I do for a college professor with 4 degrees in medieval poetry who thinks that this country is awful and who thinks that the world owes him a gigantic living, and so therefore he's got a right to control everybody else's lives and tell other people how to live. Infinitely more respect for those people. They're honest, decent people. These intellectuals are horrible people. So your garden variety person out there who's holding a copy of War and Peace under their arm and never opened the book, and they've got glasses that don't have, prescriptions in the lenses, these kind of people, their coin of the realm is unearned moral superiority. They want to look and act better and smarter than you are. So when Will Ferrell says, I think the tax rate ought to be 75%, what he's really saying is, I'm a much better person than you greedy people out there. Yes, I make $15 million to stand in front of a camera and mug for a few hours a day and then go back to my luxury trailer. Yes, of course, I know that I could feed entire villages in Africa for the cost of one day's pay. Yes, I know that I work in an industry where I get paid in the space of a few seconds more than anybody else in the entire crew is going to get during the 6-week or 6-month length of this entire movie shoot. They know that. But by saying things like, I think we should give away 75%, I get paid too much, I make too much money, I should be taxed more, this is their way of showing you that they're swell guys and that they're decent guys and that they're moral guys and they're more morally advanced than you, but it's all a bunch of crap and everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. The proof in the pudding is that Will Ferrell wants to pay 75% tax rate. He can pay that tomorrow, but he won't. If he really wants to live up to what he says, these guys like Matt Damon and George Clooney and all these guys making this posturing could simply abolish their production companies. They could have the check written to them. They could get a $10 million check for a movie and part with $7.5 million of it. They'll never do that in a million years because they're hypocrites, because they don't believe in anything. They just want to look and feel good. I'll tell you something else about most of these liberals. The reason that they have to plug their ears, and getting to Ray and Aaron's question about why they unfriend friends who are conservative, is because if it dawns on them that everybody else is doing something else, they'll change. They're victims of social proof. If all the cool kids were conservatives, they'd be conservatives. They don't know and they don't care. They just want to be cool. They want to fit in. And so this is why they can't hear another opinion, because when you talk sense to these people and you ask them to defend these things, you present them with facts and logic and history, then they start to have this cognitive dissonance. I can't start thinking about these things because if I do, I might have to change my mind. If I change my mind, I'd change my identity and I lose all my friends. There it is. The great example of this is David Mamet, who is the best writer living today. He's certainly the best dramatic writer living today. He's a certifiable masterpiece genius. And David Mamet was a big old liberal. And Mamet, over time, because he's such a talented artist, he has to examine life. If he's going to be good at what he does, he has to look at what people say, why they say it, how they sound, what are they saying, and reproduce that with a message behind it. And over the course of time, a guy like Mamet became aware of the fact that everything he believed was wrong. And Mamet had the intellectual and moral courage to admit that he was wrong, and he changed his mind. But the salient point about Mamet is, when Mamet wrote that article in the Village Voice saying why he wasn't a liberal anymore and why he'd become a conservative, and listed all the reasons why, Mamet may not have known, I suspect he probably didn't fully realize, that he was saying goodbye to all of his friends. 95%, 99% of his friends weren't going to talk to him anymore. Because if Mamet turned, then maybe they would turn. And what happens if they turn? They lose their entire identity. Think about this, folks. Think about if everything you believe is wrong. There's a lot emotional at stake there, isn't it, really? It's probably as good a place for me as any to talk about this because it's a source of ongoing shame for me. I named my blog Eject because I had ejected from my previous worldview. I was a lot more liberal than I am now. But when I say something like I was a lot more liberal or Bill used to be a liberal, I'll see that every now and then. Can't really argue with that, but it makes me kind of cringe because the fact of the matter is, when I was at my most liberal in college, I was always pro-American, loved this country, loved it, thought it was the greatest place in the world, #1 country in the world, best at everything, loved this country, loved the military, wanted to fly for the Air Force, loved business. When I went to make those movies, I didn't go for a grant or say, give me some money so I can practice my art. I tried to make it a business deal, tried to take some money, and I had a plan to sell a product and return more money than I took in. So I was a lot more liberal than I am now, but I was pro-business, I was pro-capitalism, I was pro-America, I was pro-military. Liberals today aren't these things, so I wasn't a modern liberal in any sense of the word. I will tell you this, though. When I was a lot more liberal than I am today, I passionately believed in things I knew nothing about. I thought Ronald Reagan was a dangerous old man because everybody else told me he was a dangerous old man. I hadn't read anything Reagan said, hadn't listened to any of the arguments. I just went along. And there's something nice about going along only in this sense. I'm not saying it's not good to be self-aware. What I am saying is that America works best when there aren't so much politics in business. I was 17, 18 years old before I found out whether or not my dad was a Republican or a Democrat. Turns out he was a Republican. Let's see. Yeah, that's my dad on screen left, and you probably recognize that other guy. But I didn't know, and I'm very happy that I didn't know. I'm very happy that I got to spend my childhood riding a bike and playing baseball, and not being taken to protests by people who really should involve children in their own politics. So how do you change their mind? I don't know. Look, I'm trying to change their mind the only way I know how, and that's by doing these videos. Things just got a little blue. Hang on a second, through the magic of remote control. Yeah, a little better. Yeah, there we go. So we do what we can. And I know many of you have been so kind to me by forwarding these videos and supporting me in Declaration Entertainment and PJTV and all that other stuff. All we can do is all we can do. Right? We just do the best we can. And certainly if there was ever a time for patriots to step up, this is the time. But I do find, and I'll just repeat this, I know I've said this before, and then we'll move on to the next question. I got a chance to spend some time with Tammy Bruce, who I'd never met before. We did an event in Arizona. And Tammy says she'll go to a college and she'll talk to kids who've been liberals their entire lives, raised by liberals, liberal high schools, liberal colleges. She'll talk to them for 15, 20 minutes and they flip. They become conservatives. And she said, it's not because of my incredible persuasive power, Bill, it's because their arguments are so thin. They've never had to defend them, and when they run into somebody who does know how to defend their arguments, they flip. They become conservatives. Of course they do. That's why they can't listen. That's why they have to plug their ears and unfriend conservative friends, because they don't want that sense of, oh my God, everything I believe is wrong. I'm going to have to eject from my worldview. But it really is a very astonishing thing, and I know I've said this before too, but I live in mortal fear of going out there one day and doing combat for the team and running into some liberal champion and just chews me up and spits me out and makes me look like an idiot, makes me feel bad and let the team down. But every day that goes by, I begin to realize not only is that not likely to happen, I just don't think it's out there. I don't think that argument exists. Forget about the champion. I don't think they have the argument. I think we take them to pieces. I think we've always taken them to pieces, and I think that's why they have to be living in a world that's based on emotion, because facts are not part of the case. So when you start hearing things about, well, why are conservatives so mean, and why do they hate the poor? It's like, you just have to sit down and explain to them why, 50, 60 years of entitlement programs and war on poverty have created the most angry, uneducated, mean-spirited underclass in certainly the history of Western civilization. Have things gotten better with the trillions of dollars we've spent on social welfare programs? No. Just as an example, black marriage rates, I believe, used to be higher than white marriage rates. Certainly their out-of-wedlock situation was infinitely better. Their graduation was infinitely better. All of this stuff is just getting worse and worse and worse. And that's really what it is about being conservative, right? I've made this argument before. I'm not going to make it now. I'm holding on to this because I think this is a book. But basically, if you're in favor of individual freedom and maximizing human happiness, at the beginning of the curve, you're a liberal. You want to change things until things improve. And then when things reach maximum optimal happiness, when life gets as good as it gets, and continued change starts to make things worse instead of better, then all of a sudden you become a conservative, right? You want to improve things and change things as they get better and better and better, and then when continued change starts to make things worse, you stop being a liberal, you start being a conservative. Whoa. Liberals are not like that. Progressives are people who think that change is always better, future is always better. They're wrong. Just no question about it. I could do a whole lot of time on that one, but I'm going to move on because I want to cover more questions during these things if I can. And that's a big topic, and we'll come back to that a bunch of times. Let's see, reading on here, Faye Shipley Weekly says, though you've probably gone over this a million times, well, hundreds of thousands of times anyway, Faye, I'd love to hear a layman's explanation of the Electoral College, why it is or isn't important, and how it affects the upcoming election. I find it hard to truly understand why my singular vote really won't count. That's an excellent question. I was on a show called Politichicks. I talked about the Electoral College. Another great example of what happens when we conservatives remove ourselves from the culture. We let people say, the Electoral College is some archaic throwback to, frontier times or our agricultural beginnings when it took 3 weeks for a guy to travel and, present his vote. And, you hear all these same kind of things that, the founders only approved muskets. They didn't approve automatic weapons, this kind of nonsense. The founders approved the right to defend yourself. They didn't approve muskets. They didn't say the people shall have the right to bear muskets. They said people shall have the right to bear arms. They shall have the right to defend themselves. So the criticisms against the Electoral College are that it's archaic, that it's a product of a time before instantaneous technology. They say it's anti-democratic because it deprives people's individual vote for president. They say it's anti-democratic. And this is where you're going to have to spend some time with people who have a problem with the Electoral College, because when somebody says the Electoral College is anti-democratic, what you have to say to them is, you're damn right it's anti-democratic. You better believe it's anti-democratic. It's precisely what it is. The Electoral College is one of the many outgrowths of our constitutional dilemma. And the dilemma exists to this day. The dilemma never went away. The dilemma was the conflict between large populous states and smaller states, states with smaller populations, not land area. We'll talk about, when I say a big state, I'm talking about population now. When you get down to the Electoral College is one of several compromises that were made in order to try and balance the needs of low population states against the legitimate concerns of high population states. One of the compromises built into the Constitution, before we talk about the Electoral College, just to give you some background, one of the compromises is the structure of our legislature. We have a bicameral legislature. We have two different legislatures. We have the House of Representatives, which favors large population states like California. It favors the disbursement of all of the people. In other words, it favors kind of the federal structure, because California has 54 congressmen, I think it is. It's a large number. And someplace like Wyoming or South Dakota has very few, because there are a lot more people in California. So it's appropriate in one of the houses that California, because it has more people, throws more weight than South Dakota, let's say. That's not inappropriate. However, in order to form this union, you had to get some protections in there for the low population states. Why would they join the union? What would be the advantage to them? If they're rural states, let's say, or maybe they're a southern state or whatever, if they're being outvoted all the time everywhere, why would they join? It doesn't make any sense. You're not going to join something where you're constantly being outvoted all the time. So what we did in terms of our legislature was we decided to split it up, and we said we'll have to have the bills passed by two different legislatures, one which is representative among the people. The more people you have, the more people you can elect to the legislature per state. But one of them is going to be protecting the rights of the states, and especially the low population states. So we have a House of Representatives where the number of representatives is determined by the population, but we also have a Senate where every single state gets 2 senators. A state with almost no people gets 2 senators, and California gets 2 senators. So that protects the smaller states. It gives them a chance. It gives them some means of blocking legislation that they don't like, or launching legislation that they do. And it's an ongoing common concern. So that's one way we deal with it. We deal with the population issue and the conflict, and trying to get both big and small states into the union by saying we'll have 2 different legislatures, and they'll have to work it out between them. Works pretty well. We watered down this quite a lot with one of these amendments. I think it was the 16th Amendment, because it used to be that you did not vote on senators. That was appropriate in my mind. It used to be that the states elected senators. Why is that important? Why would you say, well, we don't want the people to vote for senators? That seems anti-democratic to me. The great experiment in human history is the American experiment of diversifying power, right? Power is what's always determined human structures, and the United States of America is the first society to try to actively, intelligently, from the beginning, get-go, built into the foundation, dyed-in-the-wool understanding of this problem, and how tyranny comes from the accumulation of power. So America was designed to divert and disperse power. So if you have a House of Representatives where the big states get all of the power, what you wanted in the Senate was you wanted a refuge of state power, because the more power the states have, the less power the federal government has. Now, if the state legislature appoints a senator, if the state legislature says, we like Jim, and the people don't get to vote, then they know that by sending Jim to the Senate, Jim is beholden only to the state of North Dakota. Or South Dakota is the example we've been using. He doesn't care about anything. He's just there to protect the rights of South Dakota. So when you have that kind of state sending a representative to the Senate, you strengthen the power of the states. And when they made that amendment to let the people vote for senators, you essentially reduce the Senate to kind of a weakened House. You still only get to send 2, but you're kind of at the will of the mass of the country, of the giant populace, rather than the protection of the power of the state. The ability for the states to have political power is what prevents us from having a federal dictatorship, which is why all of the problems that we seem to be having, going back to the Chick-fil-A thing, the gay marriage thing, with abortion, gambling, all of these things are a result of us allowing the states to lose power. I got a little bandwidth warning here, which makes me unhappy. But we'll press on, and if we have to restart, we'll press on. Come on, this is so annoying, right in the middle of all this. Anyway, I'm going to assume that the recording is still holding on. So let's get back to the Electoral College. What the Electoral College does is the Electoral College means that the President of the United States of America cannot be elected by the cities. If the popular vote determined the presidential election, if the president was elected by a national popular vote, then the president would simply have to campaign in New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, Dallas, San Francisco. The president would simply have to campaign in just a few large cities, and the urban populations and their needs would basically rule the country. So the purpose of the Electoral College is to make sure that the president, now listen, here's your thumbnail explanation, right? The purpose of the Electoral College is to make sure that the chief executive of the United States, the president of the United States, has to be appealing to the entire country. If you think about America, many people just think, oh, America is just a nation, it's a country, but it's not. America is 5 or 6, if not 10 or 20 individual cultures that share a common government, but they're vastly different. The people who live in French Louisiana, the Cajuns down there, are totally different people than the Yankees up in Maine, and the Midwestern dairy farmers are completely different people than the people who live in the Southwest. America is a tremendously diverse nation, and what you want is you want a president who has to appeal to all of these different groups, because he has to appeal to at least more than half of the different states. So you can't just campaign in the cities. The president of the United States, in order to be elected, has to go down to the bayou and he has to eat crawfish. Then he has to go up to Wisconsin and he has to have corn. Then he has to fly out to Maine and have clam chowder. And then he has to go down in the South and have mesquite barbecue. And he has to make a case to appeal to all of the people. He has to have an argument for the Rust Belt workers in Michigan. He has to have an argument for the wine growers in California. What it does is it makes the president have to become a representative of all the people. And if you were just counting popular vote, you simply could just tally up the votes of the cities, and you would have a president who only appealed to people who lived with concrete under their feet. And nobody thinks that's fair. Is it anti-democratic? It is anti-democratic. It's Republican. And the reason that this is such a tough thing to sell to people is because we've been deifying this idea of a democracy, and that's not correct. We should be deifying the idea of a republic. Certainly our listeners here know the difference between a republic and a democracy. People think the ability to vote is magically, automatically okay. You look in history and you'll see scores of civilizations, well, probably not scores, but certainly handfuls of civilizations that voted away all of their freedoms and rights. The Nazis did it all. It just happens all the time. It's happened in Venezuela. It happens everywhere. People get a little crazy, and people will go with the flow. There's a great book called Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds about how people, like other herd animals, once they start running in a direction, they'll run right off a cliff. So when people say democracy, 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 democracy is lovely to the degree that the will of the people should be listened to when it is a reasoned, deliberate, reflective, long-term, common-sense will. But these little flashes of madness, like the flash of madness we're seeing now, need to be dampened, not eliminated, dampened. They need to be harder to affect change. So one way you do that is divert power from the federal government out to the states and then down to the local level. And you try to make sure that the president has to appeal to more or less everybody. And back to the republic issue, I had this thought. It was a shocking thought to me. It was actually almost like a lightning bolt for me when I had the thought that if you lived in a perfect republic, if you lived in a republic where every single person's rights were absolutely manifest, jealously defended by a legal system that was strictly honest and ruthless about defending your rights, if you had a legal system that had all of your fundamental rights enshrined and a legal system to protect them, you would not need a democracy at all. If you had that system to start with, actually democracy would be bad for you, because the only thing that could happen if all of your rights were protected is people could vote to weaken those protections. That's kind of where we are now, right? That's why we are conservatives. We think we've already passed the downside of that change hill. We think our rights and our freedoms are being eliminated by democracy. So yes, it's nice to have a representative who represents the general will of the people of that area. But the idea of just democracy is not good. And I see a comment, I think it's Ian McLaren says something that is really a great argument for minorities, by the way, because you hear a lot of minority people fall into this argument. You know, a lot of inner city people have a problem with the Electoral College. They like Barack Obama and so on. You need to tell them. Jason, if I didn't have your question listed, I'm sorry, I'm not going to get to it. So I don't get all of them. Anyway, when you have a republic that protects rights, the people whose rights are most protected are minorities, right? The definition of democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on who's going to have dinner, who's going to be for dinner, what's going to be. Sorry, I totally messed up that beautiful little aphorism. Definition of democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding on what's for dinner, right? A republic protects that. You don't want a democracy. If you don't have protections from a republic, then the minority gets outvoted every time. And a minority is what's protected by the Electoral College in the sense that it's a minority state. If you live in the state of South Dakota and you eliminate the Electoral College, the President of the United States will never have anything to do with South Dakota. They will not know what South Dakota is about. They won't care about its needs. They won't care about what goes on there. They just don't care because it's a few 100,000 people, right? So the Electoral College is there to make sure that the various different cultures of America are all represented by the president. The president has to appeal to all of them. He can't just appeal to one group. He has to appeal to the whole. It makes the president go to places like South Dakota and listen to people because he needs electoral votes. So that's the short form on the Electoral College, I think. Moving on. David Buckner. You'll lose audience if you do the show I want, all Star Trek. Yeah. You know what? I'm not going to lose audience. I talked about doing a Star Trek or sci-fi show, and maybe we'll do it next week, or maybe we'll do it the week after that. But we started late, and we're late, and we're running slow on time. And to be honest with you, David, it's not that I don't want to do the questions. Just if I start on that question, I'm not going to get to anything else. I think there's a tremendous argument, a tremendous show to be done on science fiction, on the idea that science fiction is the mental laboratory of society and politics, that science fiction allows you to play with ideas and culture, and that you could never do in the real world. So how about if we bring that back next week? And in fact, if you guys want to remind me in the comments section when we open it up next week, we'll do a whole sci-fi episode and we'll talk about Star Trek and Star Wars and the difference between them, and how science fiction lets us see things. I actually starting to almost think of Atlas Shrugged as virtually science fiction to me as far as I'm concerned. So I love the question. We'll just do it next time. Moving on, we're at about 7:37 now. We'll go to about 8, maybe 8:05, somewhere in that ballpark. And get ourselves a good 90 minutes in there. Michael Hickey, glad you're feeling better. What's your take on conspiracy theories, and are there any you would admit to subscribing to? Just curious. That's an excellent question. It's an excellent question. It's an excellent question because it goes to what defines rational thought. Sorry about that noise. That's how I look at it. Do you believe in any conspiracy theories, and if you do, which ones, and why don't you believe in others? And I think that is a pretty good lead-in for the definition of what rational thought is. Occam's razor, as most of you know, is the principle that all other explanations being equal, mind you, the simplest explanation is the most likely one. It's not always the one, but it's the most likely one. When you get into some of these big conspiracy theories, what you'll find that most of these conspiracy theories, which I have launched a personal jihad against, because I think in many cases they're just a sign of real inability to think clearly, and in some cases major mental derangement because of the emotional appeal. The emotional appeal of some of these things are so strong that people have to invent the kind of mental gymnastics that tells me that their desire to believe something this awful is really overpowering in them. So I'm going to choose my words carefully here. Not that stopped me before. So let's take a couple of examples of some conspiracy type theories, or at least, unusual beliefs. I think the best one is the Loch Ness Monster. First of all, you have to understand what powers most conspiracy beliefs, and that is that people like the idea of there being undiscovered things in life. People like the idea that there might be pixies or Bigfoot or Yetis or dwarves or something. The idea that the world is more interesting if there are unknown things out there, and that world becomes more interesting, and that you become a more interesting person by having discovered them. So let's go to Loch Ness. Certainly we can all agree that it is a much, 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 much more interesting world, and it is certainly a much more interesting lake if there is in fact a prehistoric plesiosaur living in Loch Ness. It's a much, much, much more fun world to live in if there is in fact a dinosaur in Loch Ness. So that's what powers the belief. And if you're standing there on the shore of Loch Ness, especially today, right? Let's say you go to England and you're just doing a tour and you decide, what the heck, we might as well go to Scotland. So you're in Scotland, you say, what the heck, we might as well go to Loch Ness. So now you're standing on the shores of Loch Ness, right? And out in the distance you see a ripple and there's no boat. Isn't your world a lot more interesting and electric? Isn't life much, much, much more fun? Don't you get that electric kind of a thrill down your spine when you think, oh my God, I see it. It's very powerful. One of the reasons I became an early opponent of conspiracy theories is because I had two examples very young when I started at the Miami Planetarium. I was 13 years old. I'll just tell one story. There were two, but I'll just tell you the one. I was working in the Southern Cross Observatory on the roof of the Museum of Science. I was probably 14 years old, and we would open up the observatory after planetarium shows at night on weekends, and we would show people Saturn, and we'd show them star clusters and Jupiter and the moons and all that stuff. And so we were up there one night, and this is in the heart of Miami, and they'd just gone to the sodium vapor lights, those orange lights, the brighter lights. And we were all up on the roof. There was a decent crowd of people, probably 20 or 30 people up there, and we're in the suburbs of Miami, and all of a sudden somebody looks up in the sky, and they go, oh my God, and they point. And off in the distance, flying towards us, we saw a V shape of about 15 ovals, glowing ovals in a V coming towards us. And everybody saw them. It wasn't like somebody imagined them. There they were. I saw them. And they were moving slightly erratically, but they were definitely flying in formation, and they were definitely oval. They were not anything. They were not airplanes. They weren't lights like that. They were these glowing kind of ghostly gray-white ovals flying towards us. And everybody up there got hysterical. People started sobbing. I was into UFOs and all that other stuff. I mean, why not? It's interesting. I didn't give any of this stuff any thought. And I was overwhelmed. It was a religious experience. And then somebody said, I heard somebody say, they're birds. They're just birds. And I said, they're not birds. They don't look like birds. You can't see wings. They said, no, look carefully. It's geese. What it was geese flying over. And because geese have a white belly, the reflection of the city lights going up into the sky, geese wings are dark, their necks are dark, they're almost black, but they're white ovals down below. And what you could see, if you started to look for it, because you had to look for it, if you started to look for it as you flew over, you could see their wings and you could see their neck, but you weren't looking for those things. You weren't prepared for it. And sure enough, they were geese. And I said, no, those are geese. And people were mad. They were really genuinely angry at the guy who said they were birds, because he'd taken all their magic away. It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. You have that moment where you see them. Somebody mentioned magic, or at least Silent America. Thank you, Mark McConnell mentioned in the comment stream. I wrote an essay about this called Magic. When I was 5, I saw a leprechaun. I saw it clear as day. We were coming up from my dad's hotel. We're in the car. I look out, and I see a rock, and I saw a little man there in a little green vest, little green pants, and he had a little green hat, and he was smoking a little pipe. And I screamed so loud, I said, my God, Mom, stop the car. What is it? Stop the car, stop the car. She thought I'd having a heart attack or something. I get out of the car, and I go running back to that rock, and I didn't see anything. And we looked for 10 minutes. God bless my mom, She let me look for 10 minutes. As soon as I got home, I went on my bike, and I went back and looking for that leprechaun on that rock. I went there every day for a week looking for that leprechaun on the rock. And it's only when I got older that I realized that I had seen, what is it, Finian's Rainbow, or something McGee and the Little People, one of these Disney movies about leprechauns. I'd seen it about a month before. Now listen, I saw that damn leprechaun. I saw it. But that leprechaun didn't exist. Because we're faced now with the leprechaun story, we're faced with two choices. Either there is a race of magical little green people that live in rocks in Ireland, but apparently can appear in Bermuda as well, who have the ability to magically appear and disappear, don't farm or grow any crops of any kind, and guard pots of gold. That's on one hand. And on the other hand, you've got a misfiring of the mechanism that allows me to see the pictures in my head that I use every single day when I write a movie script. Because when I write a movie script, I'm out there. I'm in the movie. I hear the people talking. I see them open doors, and that's what the imagination is. Now, which one of these is more likely? Let's go back to Loch Ness. The simplest explanation for Loch Ness is so devastating. It's so devastating. I wrote about it in Magic. When I really started to think about it, it just shocked me at how much emotional steam we put behind our need for there to be these things. Because plesiosaurs, the ancient dinosaurs, the long-necked things with the big paddles, breathe air. They're air breathers, just like whales. We don't think of whales as mythological creatures because when a whale swims by on the coast, every few seconds, if not every minute or two, down goes the whale, disappears. And then a few minutes later, and then down it goes. So whales aren't mythological, they're real. Why are they real? Because they're air breathers too, and air-breathing animals have to come up to the surface where the air is. So, folks, when you think about it, if there was a Loch Ness monster, we wouldn't see one ripple every 30 years or some blurry picture. If there was an air-breathing dinosaur in Loch Ness, we would have HD video photographs from 10,000 perspectives, and we'd see it 15 or 20 times an hour. Everything that time came up, Darby O'Gill and the Little People, thank you, Bart. Every time that thing came up, we'd have pictures of it. Of course there's no monster in Loch Ness. And then all of that other evidence that I'm about to give you, which follows, is utterly irrelevant because it's an air breather. You'd have to see it 15, 20 times an hour. You'd see nothing but it. Then they get in Loch Ness, and it turns out there's no fish in Loch Ness. So what does this thing do? Does it order pizza? How does it eat? What does it eat? There's nothing for it to eat in Loch Ness. And then you find that Loch Ness is filled with logs that sink, and every now and then the bacteriological decay generates a little bit of methane gas, and this log rises up to the surface. People see it all the time. And then the log sinks again. Please. Okay? Obviously, there's no monster in Loch Ness. And obviously, there's not that kind of magic in this world. There's no leprechauns. I hate to be the guy who breaks it to you. This is the difference between liberals and conservatives. It sucks that there aren't leprechauns, and it sucks that there's no Loch Ness monster, and it sucks that there are no UFOs either. Because even the most obscure UFO sighting has got the challenge of being some unusual flying object, some atmospheric thing, some flaw in the camera lens, or maybe some advanced Defense Department vehicle versus a civilization that can travel across the light years and yet chooses to zip around in little things the size of Volkswagens and is not detectable by radar, except sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And they travel around the entire country and around a world with 6 billion people, and it's only seen every now and then, and it never lands right in front of a TV crew. It's always a distant glimpse, or there may be a little fuzzy shape behind a tree, or there's a kind of an odd-looking sort of a light in the sky. It's never a full-screen picture in front of everybody, and it's never these things. There are unusual things in the sky. There's unusual things in the ocean, too. But which is more likely? I think the chance of UFOs being actual flying saucers, alien species, is a thousandth of a percentage point. A thousandth of 1 percentage point. There is a slim chance that is the case. A slim chance. Slim. Microscopic. No chance, as far as I'm concerned. I certainly do not believe in them. But I suppose theoretically, we're getting to the issue of what conspiracy theories could you believe. I suppose theoretically, it's at least possible. Now, the 9/11 conspiracy, on the other hand, is impossible, which is why I despise these people so much, why I won't tolerate them. I will defriend them. I've done it. I had somebody say, Once somebody said, "Oh, Bill's obviously bought into the whole 9/11 truth thing, and bought into the the official thing of 9/11, and just we wish he'd open his eyes because he's so good with all this other stuff." I went right to their page. I said, "I don't want you linking my stuff anymore. I don't want you sending my stuff out anymore. I don't want my name associated with you anymore. I'm not going to be associated with the people who are trying to distance the people that murdered those 3,000 people." I'll just give you one little example about the 9/11 conspiracy things. You see these guys and they'll show a freeze frame of a video, and here's the bottom of the 757 on frame 692, and here you can see the weapons pod, which is not normally on the back of it. And I know what digital reflections do to digital cameras, but there's just weapons pod, and it's not on any other video. And it's not on even different frames of the same video. You managed to grab one freeze frame where there's some anomalous thing. We're going to build a whole case out of this. Meanwhile, these same people believe that the Pentagon was hit by a missile. Now, as it turns out, at my dad's funeral, which was at Arlington National Cemetery, is what got me writing Eject, 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 I talked to a guy who was doing a ceremony on that hill. He saw that 757 fly over his head at 50 feet. He watched it hit the Pentagon. He felt the blinding flash of light on his face, and then he watched as little pieces of people started to rain down, along with the aluminum. So, if that was a missile, then the people in the conspiracy had to get this Army major named Major Crisp to go along with it. And they had to get all of the families that were there for that ceremony to go along with it too. And they had to account for the people who were coming to the ceremony, who they may not have known about. They had to be in on the conspiracy. And all the people driving down the freeway, who happened to be driving down the freeway at that same exact time that the missile hit that building, every single one of those people had to be on the conspiracy. And the people behind them, because the traffic could have been a little slow, and the people in front of them had to be a little fast in case the traffic was light that day. All of those people had to be on the conspiracy, because if one person is driving along in traffic, of the thousands and thousands of people that saw that airplane hit that building, if one person comes out there and says, "Here, I got a perfectly good picture of it being a missile," then the whole thing comes apart, right? The whole thing comes apart. How absurd do you have to be to believe this? How absurd do you have to be? What happened to those jets? Well, those jets were flown to a remote location and the passengers were killed, and they were taken into Canada. They're flown over the Atlantic and destroyed. Really? Who does that? The military. How many military people do you know? This is what it comes down to with the 9/11 conspiracy, right? It was the CIA. How many CIA people do you know? I know a guy who works very highly placed in the FBI, and I know a couple of people who work in the CIA, and these are decent family people who love this country and are here to protect it as much as they can. These people are going to go out and murder innocent civilians for what? Because George Bush or Dick Cheney wanted to make some more money? You actually honestly believe that? You actually honestly believe this whole thing? It's absurd. Moon landing conspiracy the exact same way. I was once sent to do battle with a big conspiracy guy. I was like the champion of the rationalists, and he was like an internationally known UFO guy. And we started talking about the moon landing. And before he started trotting out all this video evidence crap, which was easily destroyed, I said, "Listen, dude, I was there for the launch of Apollo 13. I saw Apollo 13 clear the pad with my own eyes. And I was standing among 300,000 other people who watched Apollo 11 lift off with their own eyes. You telling me that didn't happen?" No, that happened. Okay, so let me make sure I got this straight. We're capable of constructing a rocket that is 365 feet high, contains 7 million pounds of essentially high explosives. And we're capable of lofting a lunar module, a command module, and all this other stuff into orbit. We can keep them up there in orbit. The Russians are tracking everything on radar. They're arch enemies. Remember, we're racing these guys for the moon, right? We're racing them for the moon. They're praying this capsule's going to explode. But we stay in orbit, and we make an announcement that they've just been up there, and we do the whole thing in a giant studio. And that really happened. When he admitted that vehicle actually went into orbit and burned 97%, 98% of the total energy needed to go to the moon just to get the thing into orbit, right? When he admitted that, I realized the guy's just mentally defective. There's something about the moon landing he can't process. Really what it was, it made him special. What I was talking about before, right? He's unique. He's an internationally known moon landing conspiracy expert. Now, he's not just some guy like me who happened to believe that we walked on the moon. The real evidence, I could do this all day, and God bless Mythbusters for tearing this thing apart, and people still, they've been bought. But if you really want to know the evidence of the moon landing, you could see it on Apollo 11, but it's clearer in later missions. Watch what happens to the dust at the feet of the astronauts, because when you see the guys moving on the moon, the dust behaves like water. It moves in slow motion because it's in zero gravity. It's in about a sixth gravity, so the arcs, the parabolas of the particles is very shallow, and the dust takes a long time to settle. But the reason you know it's not faked is you can't slow film down and do this. Watch the dust behave on the moon, and you'll watch that dust spray like water. When you see the rovers moving over the moon, the lunar dust, which is very fine, it's talc, comes out in jets like it's like a rooster tail in the water. The reason it looks so different is because dust in air is supported by the air. If you bang a couple of chalk erasers together in a classroom, you get a big cloud of dust. Why? Because the air molecules are supporting the dust molecules. But if you were in a vacuum and you bang those two things together, it would come off like water spray. So that means that the set had to be a vacuum, and that meant that the room had to be big enough so that it was in a vacuum, because you can't do this with an atmosphere. It only happens in a vacuum. And then you run into engineers, and engineers will tell you something interesting, which is actually you have to do the research on it to find out how true it is. But then I had an engineer tell me, you know, Bill, it is much harder to make an area the size of a movie studio into a near total vacuum. That's much harder than going to the moon. Much easier to go to the moon than to do that. He's absolutely right, too. He's absolutely right. And when you look at the rovers, and these rovers go on for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles of uninterrupted footage, where did they think they shot this? Oh, they shot it out in the desert. Well, you don't get the kind of dust trails coming off of those things that you get in a desert. You cannot do that in an atmosphere. There's no way to fake it. There wasn't computer graphics. Of course we went to the moon. Of course we went to the moon. And the big question then becomes, what part of you is so emotionally diseased that you can't accept that? What part of you is so emotionally diseased that you cannot believe we did it? More and more kids today don't believe in the moon landing because they didn't think we had the computers. And the video looks like it was shot 100 years ago. Well, it wasn't shot 100 years ago. It was shot half 100 years ago. Yes, it was primitive video. Yes, they didn't have computers. Yes, they did this on slide rules or computers with the power of your, simple 4-button calculator that you get for $1 with a, Happy Meal. I think one of the real reasons that so many kids have problems believing that we went to the moon is if they had to come to grips with the fact that their ancestors, not just their parents, that their grandparents went to the moon doing the math in their head, they wouldn't be precious snowflakes anymore, would they? They begin to realize just how far they've fallen, just how far we've fallen as a people, how far we've fallen from the men that did those things back in the 1960s. They don't want to face that. I don't want to face that either, but I do. There's something diseased about somebody who watched those airplanes hit those buildings in real time. What is it about 9/11 that doesn't bear scrutiny? What is it? What doesn't bear scrutiny? What is it about the official story that's unbelievable? It's perfectly believable. It's 100% believable. Red Fisher in the comments said it's the need for attention. Exactly. Everybody, oh, you bunch of idiots, you sheeple. You sheeple out there believe the official story, but I am so deep, you see. I'm so incredibly intellectually advanced, and I'm so brave morally that I can see the machine wheels turning. Yeah, okay. Part of this is innocent, too, because before I started thinking about things, back when I was a lot more liberal, I read a book called Best Evidence about the Kennedy conspiracy. And this was a book that basically said that Kennedy was shot from the front, taken to his plane was put on the plane, and then they altered his wounds. They made entrance wounds into exit wounds and did this whole thing so that the autopsy would reveal blah, 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 blah. And get into the whole thing. And when you do this is kind of how liberalism works too. When you isolate everything and you just concentrate on one little variable, like that little pod on the back of one frame of a video of the airplane, you can start to get people. You isolate one little itty bitty thing and you make a little box around that and you go, that makes sense, right? And you go, well, I guess that kind of makes sense. And you have another little box over here and you say, that makes sense, right? You say, well, connect all the boxes, there you go, there's a big conspiracy. Nonsense. You have to look at these things in a string. So it just gets so frustrating to me. But anyway, I was reading this book, Best Evidence, and I thought, man, I actually got scared. I was reading, it was a rainy night in California, it's unusual, and I was living in a little apartment, I was a chauffeur, it was about 2 a.m, and I was reading this book, and I thought, man, I am on to knowledge, I'm wondering if I'm being watched. I wonder if there's somebody out there watching me, because once it, I'm really on to what really happened. And then comes a guy named Posner, I don't think it was Gerald Posner, who wrote a book called Case Closed, about the Kennedy conspiracy. And when I finished reading that book, it was one of the best books I've ever read. I can't recommend it highly enough, because when I finished reading that book, I said, okay, anybody who doesn't believe after reading this that Lee Harvey Oswald shot John Kennedy alone has got some emotional need to believe something different. He utterly destroyed, he doesn't destroy the conspiracy theories. What he does is he goes into detail about what actually happened. And when you have the details of what actually happened, it makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. Lee Harvey Oswald was a. By the way, as he points out, as Posner pointed out, Best Evidence, which is a 400 or 500 page book, spends 2 pages talking about Lee Harvey Oswald, and then only as a patsy. You have to understand Lee Harvey Oswald to understand why he would shoot the president of the United States. And once you understand his motive and his motivation and just how mentally diseased that guy was and why he did it, then the rest of the thing makes perfect sense. I've stood in the window of the Texas Book Depository, and I've had guys who I respected as shooters saying, it's an impossible shot, I never could have made it. Doesn't look impossible to me. The guys who were doing the shooting and the recreation didn't look possible to them. Certain things about the timing issues are resolved by Posner's book. Once you read Posner's book, it gives you a perfectly understandable, believable, logical, reasonable explanation for what really happened. And this is an interesting point about 9/11 conspiracies and moon landing conspiracies and Kennedy conspiracies. No two conspiracies are the same. Why is that? The people on the reasonable side of the argument, our story is exactly the same. We have the exact same story about how Oswald shot Kennedy. We have the exact same story about how we got to the moon. We have the exact same story about what happened on 9/11. We don't have to have 15 different versions to make up for this problem or that problem. The truth has that quality. The truth has the quality of being believable. Yeah, was Oswald a leftist? You bet he was a leftist. He was a communist supporter, defected to the Soviet Union. They wouldn't take him, so he slit his wrists in a Moscow hotel, and they decided that the risk of an American dying there was worse, so they took him reluctantly. They gave him a job in a television factory in Moscow, outside of Moscow, and for about 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, something like that, this miserable, mean-spirited little bully of a man actually was a special guy. He was an American in Russia in 59, 60, somewhere in there. And for a brief period of time, he was a celebrity, and he got to meet a pretty girl, and he got to be the big man in the village, and everybody wanted to know what it was all about. And after about a month or 2 or 3, people realized that Oswald's just a little jerk, just a little sad, pathetic, weak individual, and they stopped treating him special. And then Lee Harvey Oswald fought the Soviet Union for about a year trying to come home. And when he decided he was going to come home, he and his wife were on an airplane, paid for by the U.S. government, I think. And he said to his wife, Marina, he said, be prepared for all the photographers when we get off of the plane in Dallas, because when we get off the plane and they see that this American defector has come back to America, there's going to be enormous press coverage. Of course there was no press coverage. Of course there was no press coverage. Nobody gave a damn about Oswald. That's what Oswald couldn't take. Once you understand that, it all makes sense. You find the people who got him the job at the Texas School Depository months before Kennedy even decided he was going to Dallas. And then this miserable little man who took shots at right-wing Texas personality named Walker, General Walker, took a shot at him. This miserable little man opens the newspapers one day. He's got a Mannlicher Carcano, which he's ordered earlier, because he just sits on his porch and just dry runs the rifle, right? He's going to shoot somebody. He's that kind of guy. Opens a newspaper one day and finds out the presidential motorcade is going under his window the day he has a major argument with his wife about him being such a loser and such a nobody. Yeah, it's an utter mystery how that happened. But Posner talks about something about conspiracy theories that I think really is essential. He talked about it with the Kennedy thing, but I think it applies to everything else. We talked about it with Nessie and the UFOs and that sense of being magical, something special, something different, exciting. What Posner said about the Kennedy conspiracy was, he said so many people needed there to be a conspiracy about Kennedy because they could not emotionally process the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation was, put aside for a minute your political feelings about John F. Kennedy. The reality of the situation in 1963 was it was untenable, it was unacceptable. It hurt to think that this handsome, charismatic man, this young, handsome man who carried the dreams of millions and millions of people, a man who was going to take us to the moon, a man who had a beautiful wife, a man who had set up Camelot, that this young, handsome, dynamic, most powerful man in the world could be taken out like that by a nothing, by a mean-spirited, lousy little runt, a mean, bitter, angry little guy with a rifle could take that away was inconceivable. It was intolerable. It was emotionally unacceptable. And so what Posner said, which I think bears such incredible weight on this thing, was he said, you have John F. Kennedy, the leader of the free world, this handsome young man on one side of the scales, and on the other side of the scales you've got this little itty-bitty, bitter, angry loser. And the emotional imperative is you want to add weight to Oswald's side of the scale to make this thing balance. It had to be about something, somebody, something. Maybe it was the mafia, maybe it was Castro, maybe it was the Russians, maybe it was Johnson, maybe it was a coup, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. It had to be something other than this. But it was that. That is reality. The best person in the world, the most giving, brilliant, fantastic, adventurous, loving, kind person, the best person on earth, can be taken off of this planet by the worst person on earth in an instant, and that is not something that bears heavy thinking about for most people. Is it? So the interesting part of the question is, are there any I would admit to subscribing to just curious? My method of thinking says to me that there are certain things that are impossible on their face, that create such logical dilemmas that I simply don't believe them. And the 9/11 missile hitting the Pentagon thing with thousands and thousands of people in traffic is a deal breaker. It immediately eliminates that conspiracy from my mind. It's utterly untenable from that point forward, any of that stuff. So 9/11's out. The moon landing, the reasons I gave you, the moon landing happened, that conspiracy theory's out. Nessie, I told you about Nessie, that's out. UFOs are not out. Because if Nessie's an air breather, then there is no Nessie. But there is a slim, microscopically slim chance that it is possible that alien creatures travel across the light years just so they can mutilate our cows. I suppose it's not logically eliminated. It's not empirically eliminated on its face, right? It's a microscopically thin chance that that's the case, but I don't believe it. It's not likely. I think the chances of it against a million to ones against, and so no, I don't believe in UFOs. What are some other things? As we get into areas that I know less about, I get less and less likely to be able to dismiss them. I'll give you a good example. There is a giant conspiracy out there about the Rothschilds and about the Illuminati and all this other stuff. I think that is extremely unlikely because of what I know about human nature. People don't like to cooperate over centuries or generations, and it's virtually impossible for two people to keep a secret. So when you have 10 or 20 or 1,000, it gets hard to believe, but I can't eliminate it. Somebody else has mentioned TWA 800. I find the missile description of TWA 800 to be unlikely. I think there is a good explanation for what happened to 800, which was a faulty wire causing an explosion in the main fuel tank of that Boeing 747. That to me is a more likely case, but there were some witnesses who saw some unusual lights. I suppose it's possible that if there was a guy in a rowboat with a SAM, I suppose it's possible. I would put the TWA 800 as in the very unlikely case, but not ruled out. There's no reason that I have to rule it out. It doesn't transcend logic like 9/11 does. It's fun to take them from the comment section. Bigfoot. Can't rule Bigfoot out, but Bigfoot is unlikely in the same way that, not in the same way that Nessie is unlikely. Nessie is physically impossible. It's an air breather. The lake is limited. Nessie does not exist. Bigfoot is just exceedingly unlikely. You'd have to have a breeding population. There should be much, much, much more evidence for Bigfoot. I think the chance of Bigfoot's about zero. And when you find out that these iconic images of Bigfoot, the one where he turns, or the footprints, when you find out these things are hoaxes because they show you the actual suit, when you can destroy the best evidence in favor of something that's extremely unlikely anyway, because it's got a zipper on it, really, honestly, no, there's no Bigfoot. Crop circles, most of the crop circles in Britain were made by one guy, and then they showed videotape. Now, here's how you know about crop circles. Crop circles appeared in England because of two men in a pub did it on a dare. And they started making a circle. You go out there with a flat board and you stamp down certain kinds of crops and they lie flat and they made a crop circle. And everybody said, my God, what happened to the crop? Maybe it's UFOs. Then they got excited. And these two guys did it for like 10 years. They documented it. They would go out at midnight. Their wives thought they were cheating on them. And they made most of these crop circles. And then they started to figure out how to make them more complex. Interesting, isn't it, that the aliens didn't come and at the very beginning leave these super complex crop circles. Funny how that happened. It's like the aliens had to learn how to make crop circles themselves. Isn't that interesting? So over time, they finally admit it. Now, what's fascinating about the crop circle thing is a crop circle would appear on the ground, and grainologists, or cereologists, that's what they were called, would go out and inspect the site, and they'd get their detectors and their radiation things, and they'd look at the bend angle, because a bend angle of 47 degrees is possible with a flat board, but if the bend angle exceeds 63 degrees, then obviously it's got to be some sort of electromagnetic field. And all of these conspiracy cereologists would go out there, and they would declare that this crop circle is an authentic crop circle, not one made by a bunch of guys in a pub. And then the next day, the guys who made the crop circle that was just certified as authentic would show videotape of them making the crop circle using night vision goggles. And then it's time to move the goalpost. Well, this other one certainly is authentic. Come on. Honestly, really, what do you need? I think of all the conspiracies that are out there that are commonly called conspiracies, that some people dismiss as conspiracies, I think the one I would lend the most credence to are the ones that have to deal with the creation of the Federal Reserve. I've seen things about the creation of the Federal Reserve that seem just shocking to me. Shocking. But I don't see anything that's defying logic. And when you start to look at the kind of mess we're in with the Federal Reserve, I would put some of this malevolent motives of the Fed higher than just about anything that comes to mind right off the bat. That doesn't mean I believe that the whole thing is a giant sort of a conspiracy or, I don't know. I don't find anything to exclude that. Bye Bye Cal wrote, what about Obama's birth certificate? My personal feeling is that there are tremendous irregularities with Obama's birth certificate. But I think that is not a tree to be barking up, because I think if I had to bet my life, I think the chances are probably a little better even than he was born there. Some people say he was born in Seattle and moved, and then there's a whole Kenya thing. Look, I don't think that the birthers are a wacky conspiracy thing. I think they've got serious reasons to be concerned. I think the new birth certificate looks funny. I think Sheriff Joe has got some interesting points. I haven't studied it well enough to know. And let me tell you why I don't want to go out on a limb and say I believe the birth certificate is authentic. And this is an important part, and it's a good place to close the show for the night. The reason I don't want to come out in favor of saying the birth certificate is a forgery is because I have not heard the countervailing evidence. Namely, I haven't heard people make the case that it's authentic. I haven't heard explained to me in a rational, reasonable way why the attacks on the legitimacy are false. See, this is what I do for a living, and this is what I think reasonable people should do when confronted with these things. You have to open up and listen to what they're saying and let people present both the case and the counter case. You can't make your decision. The reason I believed in best evidence that the body was surgically altered was because I never heard the other side. And finally, isn't this a lovely bow to tie things up with for the night, folks? Isn't that really what the whole liberal control of the media and entertainment and putting your ears in and defriending friends on Facebook is all about? Making sure you don't get to hear the other side of the case? I can't rule out the birth certificate, and I can't rule it in. I don't know. I don't have the evidence. I haven't had anybody explain it to me. I think there's something smells funny there. I think this whole history of this guy is, I certainly know for an absolute fact that his entire history is a history of secrecy and covering up his background. I have tremendous suspicion about the background of this guy, but that doesn't mean I have evidence that his birth certificate is false. There are plenty of other reasons to disqualify him as president from stuff that he admitted in his own words in his autobiography, which I happen to think was not written by Barack Obama. I think there's a strong case, an excellent case, that Dreams for My Father was written by Bill Ayers. I think there's a remarkable, strong case for that. But I don't have proof. So if you ask me about some of these conspiracies, I can only tell you I decide on what I hope is a consistent basis. If there is a logical contradiction that simply defies the laws of physics or even the most fundamental common sense, things like an air-breathing animal that never comes to the surface, or a missile that's launched at a building and everybody's told it was an airplane, and making 10,000 random motorists lie. That just didn't happen. The idea that we would go into orbit but not go to the moon, and that we built a studio big enough to, that's nonsense. That didn't happen. We went and landed on the moon. We've seen pictures from orbit now with the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. We can see the LEMs on the ground and the flagpoles and the tracks and all that stuff. Of course we went to the moon. UFOs, extremely unlikely. Yetis, somewhat yet less unlikely, but very unlikely. Faked evidence in all these cases, known faked evidence. Why do you have to fake evidence if it's true? How many belief systems are based on the fake evidence? And you get into Barack Obama's history, it gets a lot more credible. And then certain things that I don't know much about, like the history of the Fed. I just don't know much about the history of the Fed. But I have heard enough about it to make me think, that seems a little unusual. Anyway, I think that'll wrap it up for the night. Looks like our timer here is 1 hour and 48 minutes. Give you a little extra added value there on account of our late start because of these technical issues. And maybe, who knows, I might be able to get us moved over to live stream next week. I keep threatening that. Maybe I should just shut my mouth and just continue on. I'm going to make a major effort to hit the save button here, unlike the delete button, which I did last time. As always, I don't feel like I can ever close the show without saying how much I appreciate all the support and all the incredible support on Facebook. I didn't even have a chance to write a congratulations, kind of a mutual congratulations post on passing 15,000. That was 10 days ago. We're at 15,720 now. We're almost at 16. So thank you all for your support. I owe my livelihood to you, and my livelihood is turning into a really lovely. It's turning into a lovely life, and I owe it all to you and your support, and I'm very, very grateful. I'm very grateful. So I will put up the link for the show tomorrow once it gets onto YouTube, and we'll try and do it again. And I don't believe in unicorns, Ian McLaren. Let me say one last thing about this. I like the fact that children believe in unicorns. I really like that. I like the fact that children believe in unicorns and Santa Claus and all that stuff. That's what children are supposed to believe in. That's what makes childhood magic. That's why Disney World works. Comes a time when you have to grow up, right? Or not. But I'd rather be an adult and face the truth, because when you get into the details of how the world actually works, the wonders of the real world far, far, far exceed the wonders that we can invent in our limited little ape brains. So it's the Ape Brains signing off for yet another Stratosphere Lounge. Thanks for joining us, and we'll try and see you next Wednesday. Bye-bye now.